Hello there and welcome. Tonight's gentle journey explores one of humanity's most enduring mysteries, the phenomenon of past life memories and what science makes of them. Stories of children who remember being someone else, adults who feel they've lived before, and the age-old question of whether consciousness can somehow persist beyond a single lifetime. But before we dive into memories that may stretch across centuries, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what thoughts about life and memory brought you here. Perhaps you've had your own moments of déjà vu so strong it felt like remembering, or maybe you're simply curious about the boundary between science and the unexplained. Whatever brought you to this quiet corner of contemplation, you're welcome here. Now, I do hope this isn't so intriguing that it keeps you awake. But if it does, well, at least you'll have pondered one of consciousness's most perplexing puzzles before you drift off. So settle in, let your breathing slow, let your mind wander through the corridors of possibility, and let's begin to explore what happens when memory seems to reach beyond the boundaries of a single life. The phenomenon we're examining tonight touches something fundamental about human experience. We all know what it feels like to remember, the sudden flash of recognition when a scent brings back childhood summers, the way a particular song can transport us instantly to another time and place, the curious experience of walking into a room and feeling absolutely certain we've been there before, even when we know we haven't. Memory shapes our sense of who we are, creates the continuous thread of identity that connects the person you were yesterday to the person you are today. But what if that thread could somehow extend further back, beyond birth, beyond the beginning of this particular life? What if memory could reach across the boundary that we assume separates one existence from another? This is the territory we're entering tonight. A landscape where scientific investigation meets ancient beliefs, where careful documentation encounters the ineffable, where the rigor of research confronts experiences that seem to defy conventional explanation. The reports come from all corners of the world, from cultures that embrace reincarnation and from those that reject it entirely. A 3-year-old in Thailand speaks with startling accuracy about a previous life in a distant village. A child in Oklahoma describes flying a fighter plane in World War II, providing technical details that would challenge an aviation historian. A young girl in Scotland recalls living in the 18th century in Ireland, speaking with an accent she's never heard and describing customs she's never been taught. These aren't vague impressions or the kind of general statements that could apply to anyone. They're specific, detailed accounts that often include names, dates, locations, and personal details that can be checked against historical records. The children who report these memories aren't usually prodigies or particularly precocious. They're ordinary children whose parents are often as puzzled and sometimes as disturbed by their statements as anyone else would be. The timing of these reports follows a curious pattern. They typically begin when children are just learning to speak, around age 2 or 3, when language is developing but formal education hasn't yet provided much historical knowledge. The memories often emerge spontaneously, triggered by a photograph, a location, or sometimes nothing identifiable at all. The child might suddenly announce, "That's not my real family," or "I used to live in the White House with the green door," or "I remember when I died." Most remarkably, these memories tend to fade as children grow older. By school age, many children who once spoke vividly of previous lives begin to focus entirely on their current existence. It's as if there's a window in early childhood when the boundary between lives becomes permeable, gradually closing as the developing brain becomes more firmly anchored in present reality. The emotional quality of these reports adds another layer of complexity. Children don't typically relate these memories with the detached curiosity you might expect from someone recounting a story they've heard. Instead, they often display strong emotions connected to their claimed past lives. Grief for relatives they insist they once knew, homesickness for places they've never visited, fears that seem to relate to how they claim to have died. Some children become distressed when their current families don't understand or believe their accounts. Parents find themselves in bewildering situations. How do you respond when your 4-year-old insists that you're not their real mother, that their real family lives in another country, and that they remember details about that family that seem far too specific to be imagination? Some families seek to verify their children's claims, traveling to distant locations or researching historical records. Others worry about their children's mental health or feel frightened by statements that seem to challenge the very nature of reality. The phenomenon crosses cultural, religious, and geographical boundaries in ways that make it difficult to dismiss as simply the product of particular belief systems. While cultures that believe in reincarnation might be more receptive to such reports, the basic pattern of young children making specific claims about previous lives appears consistently across different societies, regardless of their dominant spiritual or scientific worldviews. This universality raises intriguing questions. If these experiences were simply the result of cultural conditioning or suggestion, we might expect them to vary more significantly between different societies. Instead, the core features remain remarkably consistent. The age at which the memories emerge, their specific and verifiable nature, the emotional intensity with which they're reported, and their tendency to fade as children mature. Yet the very consistency of these reports, while intriguing, doesn't automatically validate their claimed supernatural origins. Human psychology, memory formation, and social dynamics operate according to certain patterns regardless of culture. The same psychological processes that might create false but convincing memories could theoretically operate similarly across different societies, producing reports that share common features without necessarily reflecting common supernatural causes. So we find ourselves at the threshold of a genuine mystery, one that has attracted the attention of serious researchers while remaining largely outside the boundaries of mainstream science. Tonight we'll explore what happens when the tools of scientific investigation are applied to experiences that seem to challenge our fundamental assumptions about consciousness, memory, and the nature of human existence. We'll examine the evidence with neither blind skepticism nor uncritical acceptance, but with the kind of gentle curiosity that recognizes mystery as an invitation to deeper understanding rather than a problem to be hastily solved. Past life memories, as described by those who report them, are vivid recollections of experiences, places, people, and events from what appears to be a previous existence. These aren't vague feelings or abstract impressions, but often detailed accounts of specific locations, historical periods, languages never learned, and relationships with people long dead. The level of detail in these reports can be startling. A child might describe not just living in a particular house, but the color of the wallpaper in the bedroom, the squeaky step on the staircase, the taste of well water drawn from a particular pump. They might recall the name of a beloved pet, the way sunlight fell through a kitchen window at a certain time of day, or the feeling of wearing clothes that no longer exist in modern times. Some children provide information about historical events they shouldn't know about. A young boy might describe the sound of air raid sirens during the London Blitz, complete with details about which underground stations were used as shelters and how families arranged their sleeping spaces in the tunnels. A girl might recount the experience of traveling in a covered wagon, describing the rhythm of oxen walking, the dust that got into everything, and the particular challenges of crossing rivers during westward migration. What makes these accounts particularly compelling to researchers is their emotional authenticity. Children don't just recite facts, they convey the feelings associated with their claimed memories. They might become tearful when describing the death of a spouse in their previous life, or light up with joy when talking about children they claim to have raised. They display preferences that seem to connect to their reported past lives. A fear of water connected to memories of drowning, a love of particular types of music from specific historical periods, or an inexplicable comfort with historical artifacts that other children find strange or frightening. The phenomenon often begins with spontaneous statements that catch parents completely off guard. A toddler might look at a photograph in a museum and say, "I remember when they took that picture of me." A child riding in a car might suddenly point to a house and announce, "I used to live there with my other family." Sometimes the memories emerge during play, with children acting out scenarios that seem far removed from their current experience but remarkably consistent with life in different historical periods. Language presents another fascinating aspect of these cases. Some children make statements in languages they've never been taught, or display accents that don't match their current environment. A child raised in suburban America might suddenly speak with a distinct regional accent from another country, or use words and phrases that were common in earlier historical periods but aren't part of modern vocabulary. While most children communicate their memories in their native language, the occasional linguistic anomalies add another layer of mystery to these already puzzling cases. The specificity of names in these reports often provides researchers with their strongest leads for verification. Children don't typically claim to have been famous historical figures. Instead, they usually describe ordinary lives with ordinary names. They might insist their name was Mary O'Sullivan, and they lived on Elm Street, or that they were called Thomas and worked at the mill by the river. These mundane details, while less sensational than claims of having been royalty or celebrities, often prove more valuable for investigation, because ordinary lives leave traces in local records, family genealogies, and community memories. Geographic details form another crucial component of many reports. Children might describe landscapes they've never seen, architectural features from different time periods, or local customs from distant regions. A child in a landlocked area might provide detailed descriptions of coastal life, including the timing of tides, the behavior of seabirds, and the techniques used for particular types of fishing. Another might describe the layout of streets in a foreign city, including changes that occurred decades before their birth. Professional details sometimes emerge in ways that seem remarkable for young children. A 4-year-old might discuss the techniques used for shoeing horses, despite having no exposure to blacksmithing. Another might describe the process of operating a steam locomotive, including technical terminology that would be unfamiliar to most adults in the modern era. These occupational memories often include not just procedures, but also the physical sensations associated with different types of work, the heat of a forge, the vibration of machinery, or the particular fatigue that comes from specific types of manual labor. Family relationships form a central theme in many past life memory reports. Children often provide detailed information about spouses, children, parents, and siblings from their claimed previous lives. They might describe family dynamics, special traditions, or significant events like weddings, births, and funerals. The emotional quality of these descriptions can be particularly moving, with children displaying grief that seems far too mature and specific for their age when they discuss the death of family members they claim to remember. The manner of death often features prominently in these accounts. Children might describe accidents, illnesses, or violence with a level of detail that can be disturbing to parents. A child might recall the experience of drowning, including the physical sensations and the sequence of events leading to the accident. Another might describe dying in a house fire, providing specifics about how the fire started and spread. These death memories often correlate with phobias or behavioral patterns in the child's current life. Historical context adds another dimension to many reports. Children sometimes demonstrate knowledge of historical periods that seems far beyond their educational experience. They might describe daily life during specific eras, including details about clothing, food, transportation, and social customs that aren't commonly taught to young children. A child might know that people in certain time periods didn't have indoor plumbing, or that they used specific tools that are no longer common, or that they followed social protocols that seem strange by modern standards. The consistency of these memories over time provides another element that researchers find significant. Unlike the fluid, changing nature of many childhood fantasies, past life memories often remain remarkably stable. A child who describes living in a particular house with specific family members will typically maintain that same basic story for months or years, adding details but rarely contradicting earlier statements. This consistency persists even when children are questioned repeatedly or when significant time passes between discussions of their memories. Some children display skills or knowledge that seem to correlate with their claimed past lives. A young child might demonstrate an unusual aptitude for activities they've never been taught, such as playing musical instruments, speaking foreign languages, or performing complex manual tasks. While prodigious abilities in children aren't uncommon, researchers note when these skills seem to match the occupations or interests described in past life memories. The gradual fading of these memories creates a poignant aspect of the phenomenon. Parents often report that their children's past life memories become less vivid and less frequent as they grow older. The intense emotional connection to claimed previous lives typically diminishes, and children become more focused on their current experiences. By adolescence, many children who once spoke passionately about past lives may barely remember having had those experiences at all. This natural progression raises questions about the relationship between memory, development, and consciousness. If these memories represent genuine recollections of previous lives, why do they fade? If they're the product of imagination or suggestion, why do they emerge so consistently at particular developmental stages? The timing of both their appearance and disappearance suggests some connection to specific phases of cognitive and emotional development, though the exact nature of this connection remains unclear. The phenomenon challenges our basic assumptions about memory, consciousness, and personal identity in ways that extend far beyond questions of reincarnation. Even if these memories don't represent literal recollections of previous lives, they reveal something profound about the human capacity for detailed, emotionally rich narrative construction and the mysterious ways in which consciousness relates to the physical brain. Whatever their ultimate explanation, past life memories remind us that human experience contains depths and complexities that we're only beginning to understand. When faced with extraordinary claims like past life memories, science doesn't dismiss them outright, but asks a fundamental question: what evidence would we need to take such reports seriously, and how might we test them? This is where the story becomes particularly interesting, because it involves applying the methodical tools of scientific investigation to phenomena that seem to exist at the very edges of what those tools can measure. The late Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, spent over 4 decades investigating these cases with the methodical approach of a detective combined with the rigor of a medical researcher. Rather than focusing on philosophical arguments about whether reincarnation is possible in principle, he treated each case as a puzzle to be solved through careful documentation and verification. His approach was revolutionary, not because he believed in reincarnation, but because he believed that extraordinary claims deserved extraordinary investigation rather than extraordinary dismissal. Stevenson's method was systematic and deliberately conservative. When a child reported past life memories, he would first interview the family extensively, documenting exactly what the child had said and when they had said it. This initial documentation phase was crucial because memory is malleable, and statements can change or become embellished as families begin to research potential connections. He insisted on recording the child's original statements before any attempt was made to verify them against historical records. The verification process itself was painstaking. Stevenson and his colleagues would attempt to identify the person the child claimed to have been, searching through death certificates, local records, newspaper archives, and family genealogies. They would interview surviving relatives of the alleged previous personality,
often traveling to remote locations and spending considerable time in local communities to gather information. The goal was not simply to find matches for the child's statements, but to create as complete a picture as possible of the deceased person's life. His criteria for a strong case included several essential elements. First, the child should provide specific, verifiable information about the previous life that goes beyond general statements that could apply to many people. Saying "I lived in a big house" is less compelling than saying "I lived in the White House with green shutters on Maple Street, and there was a well in the backyard with a broken handle." Second, this information should be unavailable through normal means such as overheard conversations, books, television programs, or family connections. Third, there should be no apparent link between the two families that could explain how the child acquired the information. And fourth, ideally, the child's statements should be documented before any verification attempts were made. The geographical distribution of Stevenson's research was significant. He investigated cases not just in cultures where reincarnation is widely accepted, such as India and Myanmar, but also in Lebanon, Turkey, Alaska, and even parts of the United States where such beliefs are uncommon. This cross-cultural approach was important because it helped address the criticism that these cases might simply reflect cultural conditioning or wishful thinking on the part of families predisposed to believe in reincarnation. One of the most challenging aspects of Stevenson's work was maintaining objectivity while dealing with emotionally charged material. Families who believe their child is remembering a past life often have strong emotional investments in having those beliefs validated. Similarly, families of deceased individuals may want to believe their loved one has been reborn. Stevenson had to navigate these emotional currents while maintaining scientific detachment, which sometimes put him at odds with the very people whose cooperation he needed for his research. The statistical aspects of Stevenson's work were particularly important. He wasn't just collecting interesting anecdotes, he was attempting to identify patterns and assess probabilities. How often do children make statements that can be verified against historical records? How specific are these statements compared to what would be expected by chance? Are there correlations between the accuracy of statements and other factors such as the child's age, the time elapsed since the previous personality's death, or the geographical distance between the two families? Over his career, Stevenson investigated more than 3,000 cases, though he considered only a fraction of these to be truly compelling. His published case studies typically focused on instances where children provided multiple specific statements that could be verified, where normal explanations seemed inadequate, and where the investigation had been conducted with particular care. Even among these selected cases, he was careful to note limitations and alternative explanations. The documentation process itself revealed interesting patterns. Stevenson noted that the strongest cases often came from cultures where extended families maintained detailed knowledge of local genealogies and community history. This could be seen as either supporting or undermining the cases, depending on one's perspective. On one hand, it meant that verification was possible and that false claims could be exposed. On the other hand, it raised questions about whether children in these communities might have access to more historical information than was immediately apparent.
Stevenson's approach to birthmarks and birth defects added another dimension to his research methodology. When children reported past life memories that included details about injuries or illnesses, he would attempt to obtain medical records, autopsy reports, or eyewitness accounts of the previous personality's physical condition. He photographed birthmarks and birth defects in the children and compared them to available documentation about wounds or marks on the deceased individuals. This physical evidence was particularly important because it seemed less susceptible to suggestion or cultural influence than verbal statements. The collaboration with other researchers became an important aspect of Stevenson's methodology. He worked with colleagues who could provide independent verification of his findings, cultural interpreters who could help navigate local customs and languages, and medical professionals who could assess the significance of physical correlations. This collaborative approach helped address concerns about investigator bias and provided multiple perspectives on the same cases. Perhaps most importantly, Stevenson was remarkably candid about the limitations of his research. He acknowledged that proving reincarnation was impossible using his methods, and that alternative explanations for even his best cases could not be completely ruled out. His goal was not to convince skeptics, but to document phenomena that deserved scientific attention regardless of their ultimate explanation. He often said that his role was to present the data as accurately as possible and let others draw their own conclusions. The question of replication presented particular challenges for this type of research. Unlike laboratory experiments that can be repeated under controlled conditions,
past life memory cases are unique historical events that cannot be recreated. However, Stevenson and his colleagues did attempt to apply consistent methodological standards across different cases and cultures, creating a kind of standardized approach to investigation that could be replicated even if the specific phenomena could not. The legacy of Stevenson's methodological approach extends beyond the specific question of reincarnation. His work demonstrated how scientific methods could be applied to spontaneous phenomena that don't fit neatly into laboratory settings. His insistence on careful documentation, multiple independent sources of verification, and systematic analysis of large numbers of cases created a template for investigating other anomalous phenomena. Critics of Stevenson's work have focused not just on his conclusions but on his methodology. Some argue that the cultural contexts in which many cases were investigated make objective verification impossible. Others contend that the standards of evidence he applied, while rigorous by the standards of case study research, fall short of what would be required for extraordinary claims. Still others suggest that unconscious bias on the part of investigators, families, and local communities could systematically distort the evidence in ways that would be difficult to detect. Yet even critics generally acknowledge that Stevenson's approach represented a serious attempt to apply scientific methodology to phenomena that had previously been dismissed without investigation. His work raised important questions about how science should deal with reports of experiences that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Whether or not his conclusions about reincarnation are correct, his methodological contributions to the study of anomalous phenomena remain significant. The question that emerges from Stevenson's methodological legacy is not simply whether past life memories prove reincarnation, but rather how we should investigate claims that fall outside the boundaries of conventional science. His work suggests that dismissing unusual phenomena without adequate investigation may be as unscientific as accepting them without sufficient evidence. The challenge lies in developing methods that can maintain scientific rigor while remaining open to possibilities that existing paradigms cannot easily accommodate. Among the thousands of cases investigated over the decades, several have become particularly well-documented examples of the past life memory phenomenon. Let's explore a few of these in detail, not as proof of anything in particular, but as illustrations of just how puzzling and intricate these reports can be. Each case presents its own unique combination of verifiable details, unexplained knowledge, and challenging questions about the nature of memory and consciousness. The case of Shanti Devi, investigated in 1930s India, remains one of the most thoroughly documented early examples of past life memory research. Born in Delhi in 1926, Shanti began speaking at the unusually late age of 4, and her first coherent statements were not about her current life but about her previous one. She insisted that she had lived in the town of Mathura as a woman named Lugdi Devi, that she had been married to a cloth merchant named Pandit Kedarnath Chauba, and that she had died in childbirth in 1925, just 1 year before Shanti's own birth. The specificity of Shanti's statements was remarkable. She described the layout of her previous home in Mathura, including details about the courtyard, the arrangement of rooms, and distinctive architectural features. She spoke of her husband's cloth business, naming specific types of fabrics, and describing the location of his shop in the marketplace. She provided details about her in-laws, including their names, personalities, and relationships within the family. Most significantly, she described the circumstances of her death during childbirth, including medical details that seemed far beyond the knowledge of a young child. What made Shanti's case particularly compelling was the manner in which verification occurred. Her statements were documented by family members and local investigators before any attempt was made to contact people in Mathura. When researchers finally traveled to that city to investigate her claims, they found that a woman named Lugdi Devi had indeed lived there, married to a cloth merchant named Kedarnath Chauba, and had died in childbirth in 1925, exactly as Shanti had described. The verification process revealed even more specific correspondences. The house Shanti described existed and matched her detailed descriptions. The family members she had named were real people with the characteristics she had attributed to them. The business details about her husband's cloth trade were accurate, including information about specific suppliers and customers that would have been difficult for an outsider to know. When taken to Mathura, Shanti reportedly recognized locations and people without prompting, and correctly identified changes that had been made to the house since Lugdi Devi's death. Perhaps most intriguingly, Shanti demonstrated knowledge of where Lugdi Devi had hidden money in the house, leading to the discovery of a cache of coins that had been placed there before Lugdi's death. She also displayed familiarity with local dialects and customs specific to Mathura, despite having been raised in Delhi where different linguistic and cultural patterns prevailed. More recently, the case of James Leininger captured widespread attention in the United States, demonstrating that past life memory reports occur even in cultures where reincarnation is not commonly accepted. Born in 1998, James began having intense nightmares around his second birthday. These weren't typical childhood fears, but detailed scenarios involving airplane crashes, with James screaming about his plane being shot down by the Japanese and calling out specific details about aircraft and combat situations. As James's verbal skills developed, he provided increasingly specific information about his claimed past life as a World War II fighter pilot. He said his name had been James Houston, that he had flown from an aircraft carrier called Natoma Bay, and that he had been shot down during a mission near Iwo Jima. He described technical details about aircraft that seemed far beyond his age and experience, including specific terminology about different types of fighter planes and their capabilities. The verification of James's statements required extensive historical research. His father, initially skeptical, began investigating World War II records and discovered that there had indeed been an aircraft carrier named Natoma Bay, and that a pilot named James McCready Houston had been shot down during operations near Iwo Jima in March 1945. The details of Houston's death matched James's descriptions, including the specific mission parameters and the manner in which his aircraft was lost.
James demonstrated knowledge that seemed to go beyond what could be easily explained by exposure to war movies or general historical information. He correctly identified specific aircraft carriers, knew technical details about fighter plane operations, and provided accurate information about Pacific theater combat procedures. He also displayed behavior patterns that seemed to correlate with his claimed memories, including an intense interest in military aircraft and a sophisticated understanding of aviation terminology. The emotional aspects of James's case were particularly striking. He showed deep distress when discussing his supposed death as James Houston, displaying grief that seemed far too mature and specific for his age. He spoke about missing his comrades and expressed concerns about his aircraft that reflected the perspective of an experienced pilot rather than a curious child. These emotional responses persisted for several years before gradually diminishing as James grew older and became more focused on his current life. In Lebanon, Dr. Erlander Haraldson investigated the case of Nazi Danaf, who as a young child claimed to remember living in Kabr Chamoun, a town located about 10 kilometers from his current home. Naziha's case was particularly valuable for research purposes because it was investigated from the beginning, with his statements documented before any verification attempts were made. Starting around age 2, Naziha began making statements about his previous life. He said his name had been Fuad Asad Khadegi, that he had lived in a house in Kabr Chamoun, and that he had been involved in some kind of accident. He provided specific details about family members, including names and relationships, and described the layout of the house where he claimed to have lived. He also mentioned specific possessions and described the circumstances surrounding his death. The verification process involved careful documentation of Naziha's statements followed by systematic investigation in Kabr Chamoun. Researchers discovered that a man named Fuad Asad Khadegi had indeed lived in the town and had died in an accident several years before Naziha's birth. The details of Fuad's life, family relationships, and living situation matched Naziha's descriptions with remarkable accuracy. When taken to Kabr Chamoun, Naziha reportedly demonstrated familiarity with locations he had never visited. He correctly identified the house where Fuad had lived, recognized family members without prompting, and showed knowledge of local geography and social relationships that would have been difficult for an outsider to possess. He also displayed emotional responses that seemed to reflect the perspective of someone who had previously lived in the community. These three cases, while representing different cultural contexts and historical periods, share common features that researchers find significant. In each instance, young children provided specific, verifiable information about deceased individuals before any investigation was undertaken. The details went beyond general statements to include particular names, locations, relationships, and circumstances that could be checked against available records. The children displayed emotional responses and behavioral patterns that seemed to correlate with their claimed memories, and they demonstrated knowledge that appeared difficult to explain through conventional means. Yet each case also raises questions about alternative explanations. Could the children have acquired information through overheard conversations, media exposure, or family connections that weren't immediately apparent?
Might the verification process have been influenced by confirmation bias, with investigators focusing on apparent matches while overlooking discrepancies? Could chance coincidence account for some of the correspondences, particularly given the large number of people who have lived and died throughout history? The geographical aspects of these cases add another dimension to consider. Shanti's claimed previous life was in a different city, James's was separated by decades and occurred in a different historical context, and Nazia's was in a nearby but distinct community. This geographical distribution might argue against simple local knowledge or family connections, but it doesn't rule out more subtle forms of information transmission. The cultural contexts also vary significantly. Shanti's case occurred in a society where reincarnation beliefs are common, potentially influencing how her statements were interpreted and remembered. James's case took place in a culture where such beliefs are unusual, possibly making his parents more rather than less likely to document unusual statements. Nazia's case fell somewhere between these extremes, in a culturally diverse region where different religious and philosophical traditions coexist. The temporal patterns in these cases raise additional questions. In each instance, the memories were most vivid and detailed during early childhood, gradually fading as the children matured. This pattern is consistent across cultures, and could reflect either genuine characteristics of reincarnation phenomena or universal aspects of childhood development and memory formation. The emotional authenticity of these cases remains one of their most compelling features. The children didn't simply recite facts but conveyed feelings and attitudes that seemed to reflect genuine personal experience. Their distress when separated from claimed past life families, their joy when reunited with supposed former relatives, and their specific fears and preferences all suggested emotional connections that went beyond mere intellectual knowledge. These detailed case studies illustrate both the potential significance and the inherent limitations of past life memory research. They demonstrate that some reports contain highly specific, verifiable information that challenges conventional explanations, while simultaneously showing how difficult it is to rule out all possible alternative interpretations. Whether these cases represent genuine memories of previous lives, remarkable coincidences, or phenomena that science doesn't yet understand, they continue to puzzle researchers and challenge our assumptions about the nature of human consciousness and memory. Before we venture too far into extraordinary explanations, it's worth examining what we know about memory itself, particularly in young children. The developing brain is remarkably plastic and impressionable, capable of forming vivid memories from the smallest fragments of information. Understanding how memory works in early childhood provides crucial context for evaluating past life memory claims, because it reveals just how complex and sometimes unreliable our recollections can be. Memory formation in young children operates differently than in adults. The hippocampus, crucial for memory consolidation, doesn't fully mature until around age 3 or 4. This means that very early memories are often fragmentary and may be reconstructed rather than genuinely recalled. Children's brains are also highly susceptible to suggestion, meaning that leading questions, repeated storytelling, or even subtle cues from adults can shape and alter their recollections in ways that make false memories feel completely genuine. The phenomenon of confabulation is particularly relevant here. Children naturally fill in gaps in their knowledge with plausible details, often without any conscious intent to deceive. When a child has partial information about something, their mind may unconsciously construct a complete narrative that feels real to them. This process can create remarkably detailed and emotionally convincing stories that have little basis in actual experience. Children are also natural storytellers, often blending imagination with reality in ways that can seem remarkably coherent to adults. The boundary between fantasy and reality is naturally fluid in early childhood, and children may not distinguish between things they've imagined, dreamed, or been told and things they've actually experienced. A vivid dream can become a memory. A story heard at bedtime can transform into a personal recollection. An imaginative play can evolve into detailed narratives that the child genuinely believes to be true. The social context in which children develop also plays a crucial role in memory formation. Young children are highly attuned to adult reactions and may unconsciously modify their statements based on the responses they receive. If a child makes an unusual statement that generates excitement, attention, or concern from adults, they may elaborate on that statement in subsequent tellings, gradually building a more complex narrative that incorporates elements from various sources. False memory formation is well documented in psychological research, and the mechanisms involved are particularly active in childhood. Studies have shown how easily memories can be implanted through suggestion, how children can come to remember events that never occurred, and how these false memories can feel completely genuine to the person experiencing them. The classic Lost in the Mall experiment demonstrated that researchers could convince adults they had been lost in a shopping center as children, complete with detailed emotional memories of the experience, even though the event had never occurred. There's also the phenomenon of cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories resurface and are experienced as new or original thoughts. A child might encounter a story, documentary, or conversation about historical events, forget the source of the information, and later recall the details as if they were personal memories. This process can be particularly subtle when the original exposure was brief or occurred during a time when the child wasn't paying close attention. The role of television, books, and other media in shaping children's knowledge cannot be underestimated. Modern children are exposed to an enormous amount of historical information through documentaries, movies, educational programs, and even casual conversations between adults. A child might absorb details about World War II aircraft from a brief glimpse of a documentary, incorporate elements from a historical novel read aloud by parents, or overhear adults discussing family genealogy. These fragments of information can later emerge as apparent memories, especially if the child has forgotten the original source.
Family dynamics play a crucial role as well. Parents who believe in reincarnation may unconsciously encourage certain statements while ignoring others that don't fit the past life narrative. The attention and excitement that follows a child's unusual claims can reinforce the behavior, leading to more elaborate stories. Conversely, parents who are skeptical may inadvertently discourage further statements, potentially causing genuine experiences to go unreported. The influence of suggestion can be remarkably subtle. A parent's facial expression, tone of voice, or body language when a child makes certain statements can unconsciously signal whether those statements should be repeated or abandoned. Children are extraordinarily sensitive to these social cues and may modify their narratives accordingly, often without any conscious awareness that they're doing so. Language development also affects how children's statements are interpreted. Young children often use language in ways that adults misunderstand. A child saying, "I remember when I was big," might be interpreted as referring to a past life when they actually mean they remember being taller yesterday, or they might be trying to express a feeling or impression that doesn't translate well into words. The timing of past life memory reports, typically occurring between ages 2 and 5, coincides with several important developmental milestones. This is when children are rapidly acquiring language skills, developing narrative abilities, and beginning to understand concepts of time and causation. It's also when they're most susceptible to suggestion and least able to distinguish reliably between different sources of information. Yet researchers like Stevenson were well aware of these psychological factors and attempted to account for them in their investigations. They looked for cases where the child's statements were documented before any investigation began, where the families had no apparent connection to the deceased person, and where the details were too specific and numerous to be easily explained by coincidence or unconscious knowledge absorption. Some cases do seem to resist easy explanation through conventional memory mechanisms. When a young child provides highly specific information about obscure historical details, demonstrates knowledge of technical procedures they've never been taught, or displays emotional reactions that seem far too mature and specific for their age, simple suggestion or media exposure becomes a less satisfying explanation. The question of how children might acquire detailed knowledge about historical periods, foreign locations, or technical subjects remains challenging. While modern media provides access to vast amounts of information, most documentaries and educational programs focus on general historical themes rather than the mundane details of daily life that often appear in past life memory reports. A child claiming to remember life in 18th-century rural Ireland is unlikely to have absorbed specific information about local farming techniques, regional dialects, or family customs from typical educational sources. The emotional authenticity of many past life memory reports also challenges simple suggestion explanations. Children often display grief, fear, or joy that seems genuine and age-inappropriate when discussing their claimed past lives. This emotional component can persist for years and appears to be deeply felt rather than performed. While emotional responses can certainly be learned or imitated, the sustained and contextually appropriate nature of many children's emotional reactions to past life memories suggests something more complex than simple mimicry. The cross-cultural occurrence of similar phenomena in societies with very different beliefs about reincarnation also complicates purely psychological explanations. If these experiences were simply the result of cultural conditioning or suggestion, we might expect them to vary more significantly between different societies. The fact that children in Christian, Muslim, and secular families sometimes report past life memories with similar characteristics suggests that cultural suggestion alone may not account for the entire phenomena.
The fading of these memories as children mature presents another puzzle for conventional explanations. If the statements were simply the result of imagination or suggestion, why would they consistently diminish as children grow older and become better able to distinguish between different sources of information? This pattern might suggest that the memories reflect something specific to early childhood consciousness rather than learned behavior or cultural influence. Still, the power of suggestion, false memory formation, and the natural storytelling abilities of children remain the most parsimonious explanations for many past life memory reports. The human capacity for self-deception is profound, and the combination of suggestion, selective attention, and confirmation bias can create compelling narratives that feel authentic to everyone involved while having little basis in reality. The challenge for researchers lies in distinguishing between cases that can be adequately explained through conventional psychological mechanisms and those that might require additional explanations. This task is complicated by the fact that suggestion and false memory formation can operate so subtly that they're difficult to detect even with careful investigation. Understanding the psychology of memory and suggestion doesn't automatically debunk all past life memory claims, but it does provide a framework for evaluating them more critically. It reminds us that human memory and perception are far more malleable and unreliable than we often assume, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence precisely because ordinary psychological processes can produce remarkably convincing experiences that nonetheless have little basis in objective reality. The interpretation of past life memories is deeply influenced by cultural context, creating a complex web of expectations, beliefs, and social practices that shape both how these experiences are reported and how they're understood by families and communities. This cultural dimension adds layers of complexity to any scientific investigation, because it affects not only what children say, but also how their statements are received, recorded, and remembered by the adults around them. In regions where reincarnation is part of the dominant religious or philosophical framework, such as parts of India, Tibet, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka, reports of past life memories are more readily accepted and may be more frequently documented. In these cultures, reincarnation isn't a fringe belief, but an integral part of understanding human existence and the afterlife. Families in these societies often have established frameworks for interpreting unusual statements from children, and communities may have traditions for investigating and validating such claims. Hindu and Buddhist traditions include detailed philosophical discussions about reincarnation, karma, and the continuation of consciousness beyond death. In these contexts, a child's statements about a previous life might be seen as natural and expected rather than unusual or disturbing. Families may actively listen for such statements and may have cultural practices for responding to them, including rituals for honoring the previous personality or ceremonies for helping the child transition fully into their current life. The Tibetan tradition of identifying reincarnated spiritual teachers, or tulkus, represents perhaps the most institutionalized approach to past life memory validation. When a high-ranking lama dies, search parties may be organized to find their reincarnation, often relying on the statements and behaviors of young children who claim to remember the deceased teacher's life. This process involves elaborate testing procedures, including presenting the child with personal belongings of the deceased teacher mixed with similar objects to see if they can identify items that belong to their claimed previous incarnation. Yet even in cultures where reincarnation is widely accepted, there's significant variation in how past life memory claims are handled. Some families may actively encourage children to elaborate on their statements, while others may worry that too much focus on a previous life will interfere with the child's adjustment to their current existence. Some communities have traditions for formally investigating such claims, while others treat them as private family matters. In Western cultures, where reincarnation is generally not part of mainstream religious belief, the same phenomena might be interpreted very differently, or dismissed outright. Christian, Jewish, and Islamic traditions typically emphasize the resurrection of the dead, or the final judgment rather than reincarnation, creating theological frameworks that don't easily accommodate reports of past life memories. In secular contexts, such reports might be viewed through psychological or medical lenses, with concerns about mental health or developmental issues taking precedence over spiritual interpretations.
This difference in cultural reception can create what researchers call a reporting bias. In cultures where reincarnation is accepted, families may be more likely to notice, remember, and report children's unusual statements. In cultures where such beliefs are uncommon or discouraged, the same statements might be dismissed as imagination, leading to underreporting of the phenomenon. This makes it difficult to assess the true frequency of past life memory reports across different cultural contexts. The language used to describe these experiences also varies significantly between cultures. In societies with rich vocabularies for discussing reincarnation and spiritual matters, children and families may have precise terms for different types of past life memories, spiritual connections, and karmic relationships. In cultures without such linguistic frameworks, the same experiences might be described in more general terms or interpreted through available conceptual categories such as imagination, dreams, or psychological phenomena. Interestingly, however, past life memory cases have been documented across all major cultural groups, including those where reincarnation is not accepted or is actively discouraged. Children in Christian families, for instance, sometimes provide accounts that their parents find disturbing or unwelcome, suggesting the phenomena isn't simply a product of cultural conditioning. These cases can be particularly valuable for research purposes because they occur despite rather than because of cultural expectations. The anthropologist Antonia Mills conducted extensive research among the Gitxsan people of British Columbia, documenting cases of children who claim to remember previous lives within their tribal community. The Gitxsan have traditional beliefs about reincarnation that differ significantly from both Asian religious traditions and Western scientific materialism. In their culture, individuals are believed to reincarnate within the same family or clan, often as their own grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Mills found that Gitxsan children's statements about previous lives were taken seriously and often checked against tribal records and community memories. The cultural framework for interpreting these reports included specific protocols for investigation and validation, but these differed markedly from the approaches used in other societies. The emphasis was on family and clan connections rather than individual spiritual development, and the criteria for accepting a reincarnation claim were based on community consensus and traditional knowledge rather than formal documentation. This cross-cultural occurrence is significant because it suggests the phenomenon isn't limited to particular belief systems or cultural practices. Whether interpreted as evidence of reincarnation, unusual memory processes, or something else entirely, the basic pattern of young children making specific claims about previous lives appears to be a consistent aspect of human experience across different societies. However, cultural context clearly influences how these reports are received, investigated, and understood, which makes objective study of the phenomenon particularly challenging. What counts as evidence varies between cultures. In some societies, the recognition of personal belongings or locations might be considered definitive proof of reincarnation. In others, such recognition might be attributed to lucky guessing or unconscious cues from adults. The role of extended family and community knowledge also varies significantly between cultures. In societies with strong oral traditions and tight-knit communities, detailed information about deceased community members may be preserved and transmitted in ways that aren't immediately apparent to outside investigators. A child's apparently remarkable knowledge of a deceased person's life might actually reflect information that's widely known within the community but not formally documented. Religious and spiritual practices within different cultures can also influence how past life memories are interpreted and developed. In some traditions, meditation, prayer, or ritual practices might be thought to enhance a child's connection to previous lives or to help them remember more details. In others, such practices might be used to help children let go of past life memories and focus on their current existence. The gender roles and social expectations within different cultures can affect which types of past life memories are reported and taken seriously. In some societies, claims about previous lives as members of the opposite gender might be more readily accepted than in others. Similarly, claims about previous lives involving different social classes, castes, or ethnic groups might be received differently depending on the cultural context. Modern globalization has created additional complexity in cultural interpretation of past life memories. Children today may be exposed to information about different cultures and historical periods through television, internet, and travel in ways that previous generations were not. This expanded exposure makes it more difficult to determine whether a child's knowledge of foreign customs or historical details reflects genuine past life memories or absorption of information from modern media sources. The documentation and preservation of past life memory cases also varies significantly between cultures. Societies with strong written traditions and formal record-keeping may be better equipped to verify historical details, but they may also be more skeptical of oral accounts and traditional knowledge. Societies with primarily oral traditions may have rich community memories but fewer formal documents against which to check specific claims. Educational systems in different cultures also shape how children learn about history and how their knowledge is assessed. In some societies, children may receive detailed instruction about local history and traditional practices from an early age.
In others, formal historical education may be limited, but informal transmission of cultural knowledge through stories and family traditions may be extensive. The legal and social implications of past life memory claims also vary between cultures. In some societies, such claims might affect inheritance rights, family relationships, or social status. In others, they might be treated as purely personal or spiritual matters with no broader social consequences. These different frameworks can influence both how claims are made and how they're investigated. Understanding these cultural dimensions doesn't invalidate the study of past life memories, but it does highlight the importance of considering social context when evaluating such reports. The same basic phenomenon may be expressed and interpreted very differently across cultures, making it essential to understand the cultural frameworks within which these experiences occur. This cultural variability also raises important questions about the nature of the phenomenon itself. If past life memories represent genuine recollections of previous existences, why would their expression and interpretation vary so significantly between cultures? If they reflect psychological or neurological processes, why would these processes manifest differently in different social contexts? These questions suggest that any complete understanding of past life memories must account for both individual psychological factors and broader cultural influences. The challenge for researchers lies in distinguishing between genuine cross-cultural universals in past life memory phenomena and variations that reflect different cultural interpretations of similar underlying experiences. This requires not only careful documentation of individual cases, but also deep understanding of the cultural contexts in which these cases occur.
To understand how past life memories might be possible or impossible, we need to delve into what neuroscience tells us about memory formation and storage. Memory isn't like a video recording stored in the brain's filing cabinet, waiting to be played back with perfect fidelity. It's a complex reconstructive process involving networks of neurons that fire together to recreate experiences, and understanding these mechanisms is crucial for evaluating claims that memories could somehow persist beyond the death of the brain that formed them. When we form memories, specific patterns of neural connections are strengthened through a process called long-term potentiation. These memory traces, or engrams, are distributed across different brain regions rather than stored in a single location. The hippocampus plays a crucial role in consolidating memories, helping to bind together information from various cortical areas into coherent recollections. The prefrontal cortex is involved in organizing and retrieving memories, while the amygdala adds emotional coloring that can make certain memories more vivid and persistent. Retrieving a memory involves reactivating these neural networks, but this process is far from perfect. Each time we remember something, the memory is slightly reconstructed and can be altered by our current context, knowledge, and emotional state. This malleability means that memories change over time, incorporating new information and reflecting our current perspectives rather than preserving exact records of past experiences. For past life memories to be genuine recollections of previous existences, we would need to explain how memory traces could somehow persist after the death of the brain that formed them. In conventional neuroscience, this seems fundamentally impossible. When the brain dies, the neural networks that store memories cease to function. The biochemical processes that maintain synaptic connections shut down, and the physical substrate that enables consciousness disappears. There's no known mechanism by which these patterns could be preserved or transferred to a new brain. The specificity of memory storage makes this challenge even more daunting. Memories aren't just abstract information, but are encoded in the precise patterns of connections between specific neurons. A memory of riding a bicycle involves not just the conceptual knowledge of what bicycles are, but the integration of visual, proprioceptive, emotional, and motor information processed by different brain regions. For such a memory to be transferred from one brain to another would require not just preserving abstract information, but recreating the exact neural architecture that encoded the original experience. Some have speculated about quantum mechanical explanations for memory transfer, suggesting that consciousness might involve quantum effects that could operate non-locally. The physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed that consciousness emerges from quantum computations in cellular structures called microtubules. While their theory remains highly controversial and lacks empirical support, it has inspired speculation that quantum effects might allow information to persist or transfer in ways that classical physics would prohibit. However, quantum effects in biological systems typically occur at extremely small scales and are easily disrupted by the warm, noisy environment of living tissue.
The brain appears to operate primarily through classical physical and chemical processes, and there's no evidence that quantum mechanics plays a significant role in memory formation or storage. Even if quantum effects were involved in consciousness, it's unclear how they could enable memory transfer between different brains. Yet neuroscience has revealed some surprising aspects of memory that might be relevant to understanding unusual memory phenomena. Mirror neurons, first discovered in monkeys and later found in humans, fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. This neural mirroring suggests our brains are naturally wired to simulate and internalize the experiences of others, creating a kind of empathetic resonance that allows us to understand and predict behavior. The discovery of mirror neurons has led to speculation about whether more extensive forms of neural resonance might be possible. Could brains somehow share information through mechanisms we don't yet understand? While this remains highly speculative, the existence of mirror neurons does demonstrate that our neural architecture is designed to process not just our own experiences but also to simulate the experiences of others. There's also growing evidence for epigenetic inheritance, the idea that environmental influences can affect gene expression in ways that are passed to offspring. Studies have shown that traumatic experiences can leave molecular scars on DNA that affect how genes are expressed, and these changes can sometimes be transmitted to children and grandchildren. While this doesn't explain specific memories, it does show that certain types of information about environmental experiences can be biologically transmitted across generations. Research on transgenerational trauma has revealed that the effects of severe stress and trauma can sometimes be observed in the children and grandchildren of those who experienced the original trauma, even when these descendants had no direct exposure to the traumatic events. This suggests that some information about experiences can be encoded in biological systems in ways that persist beyond individual lifetimes, though this occurs through genetic and epigenetic mechanisms rather than through memory transfer. The phenomenon of genetic memory in animals provides another intriguing parallel, though it operates through very different mechanisms than conscious recollection. Monarch butterflies migrate thousands of miles to wintering grounds they've never seen, following routes that are somehow encoded in their genetic inheritance. Sea turtles return to specific beaches to lay eggs, navigating by magnetic fields and other cues that guide them to locations where they've never been. These behaviors suggest that complex information about locations, routes, and behaviors can be inherited, though this occurs through instinctual programming rather than conscious memory. Some researchers have explored whether human genetic inheritance might include more complex information than previously thought. Could certain preferences, fears, or behavioral patterns reflect genetic memories of ancestral experiences? While individual memories clearly cannot be genetically encoded, there's some evidence that general tendencies and predispositions might be influenced by ancestral experiences through epigenetic mechanisms. However, none of these genetic explanations easily account for the specificity of many past life memory reports. Inheriting a general aptitude for languages or a predisposition towards certain fears is very different from remembering specific conversations, particular locations, or detailed personal relationships. The level of specificity reported in many past life memory cases would require mechanisms far more precise and complex than anything demonstrated in studies of genetic or epigenetic inheritance. The plasticity of the developing brain adds another dimension to consider. Young children's brains are remarkably adaptable, capable of forming new neural connections at an extraordinary rate. This plasticity, which allows children to learn languages and skills with remarkable ease, might also make them more susceptible to unusual memory phenomena, whether these involve genuine past life recollections or more conventional processes of suggestion and imagination. Neuroplasticity research has shown that the brain can reorganize itself in response to experience, forming new neural pathways and modifying existing ones throughout life. In young children, this process is particularly active, creating windows of opportunity for rapid learning and adaptation. Could this heightened plasticity also create conditions where unusual memory phenomena might be more likely to occur? Some researchers have speculated about morphic fields, hypothetical organizing principles proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake that might allow patterns in nature to be influenced by similar patterns that occurred in the past. According to this theory, the formation of memories might create fields that could influence the formation of similar memories in other brains. However, morphic resonance remains outside mainstream science and lacks empirical validation. The study of savant syndrome provides another perspective on unusual memory phenomena. Some individuals with developmental disabilities display extraordinary abilities to recall vast amounts of information with perfect accuracy, sometimes demonstrating knowledge that seems to exceed their apparent learning opportunities.
While savant abilities clearly operate through conventional neural mechanisms, they suggest that the human brain is capable of memory feats that we don't fully understand. Research on cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories resurface and are experienced as new thoughts, shows how complex the relationship between memory and consciousness can be. Information that was once consciously known can become unconscious and later re-emerge in forms that feel like new discoveries or insights. This process demonstrates that memory operates in ways that often remain hidden from conscious awareness. Still, despite these intriguing findings and speculative possibilities, mainstream neuroscience provides no clear pathway by which detailed, specific memories could survive the death of the brain that created them, and subsequently appear in a different brain. The physical basis of memory in neural networks and synaptic connections seems incompatible with the idea of memories existing independently of the biological systems that encode them. The challenge for any theory of past life memories lies not just in explaining how information might transfer between brains, but in accounting for the specificity and coherence of the reported memories. Random information transfer might conceivably produce fragments of knowledge, but the detailed, emotionally coherent narratives reported in past life memory cases would require mechanisms that could preserve not just isolated facts but complex patterns of experience, emotion, and personal identity. Understanding the neuroscience of memory doesn't automatically debunk past life memory claims, but it does establish the extraordinary nature of what such claims would require. If past life memories represent genuine recollections of previous existences, they would necessitate mechanisms of memory preservation and transfer that operate far outside our current understanding of how brains work, how memories form, and how consciousness relates to physical processes in the nervous system. Could there be biological explanations for what appears to be past life memory that don't require consciousness to survive death? Some researchers have explored whether certain traits, preferences, behavioral patterns, or even specific knowledge might be inherited through genetic mechanisms in ways that could create the impression of remembering a previous life, offering a middle ground between supernatural explanations and complete dismissal of the phenomena. We know that many characteristics are heritable, extending far beyond obvious physical traits to include aspects of temperament, cognitive abilities, personality tendencies, and even some specific fears or preferences. Twin studies and adoption research have demonstrated that genetics influence everything from musical ability to mathematical aptitude, from language learning capacity to susceptibility to certain phobias. If a child displays unusual knowledge or skills that seem to come from nowhere, could this reflect the expression of inherited genetic potentials rather than memories from a previous incarnation? The field of behavioral genetics has revealed the extent to which genes shape not just our physical development, but also our psychological characteristics. Intelligence, creativity, temperament, and even complex traits like leadership ability or artistic talent show significant heritability. A child who quickly masters a foreign language or displays unusual artistic sophistication might seem to be remembering skills from a past life when they're actually expressing inherited genetic capacities that create learning advantages in specific domains. Musical ability provides a particularly striking example of genetic inheritance that can seem almost mystical in its manifestations. Some children display extraordinary musical talents from very early ages, demonstrating perfect pitch, complex rhythmic understanding, or sophisticated harmonic intuition that appears to emerge spontaneously. While these abilities clearly have genetic components, to observers unfamiliar with the hereditary nature of musical talent, such precocious abilities might seem to suggest memories of previous musical training or performance. Language acquisition presents another area where genetic inheritance might be mistaken for past life memory. Children vary dramatically in their facility with languages, and some display remarkable abilities to pick up foreign languages with minimal exposure. A child who quickly learns to speak with a particular accent, or who demonstrates unusual familiarity with the grammar of a foreign language might appear to be remembering linguistic knowledge from a previous life, when they're actually expressing inherited language learning capabilities. There's also the possibility of what some researchers speculatively call genetic memory, the idea that certain types of information might be encoded in our DNA and passed down through generations. While this remains largely theoretical for complex memories, we do see examples of inherited behavioral patterns in animals that suggest sophisticated information can be genetically transmitted. Monarch butterflies navigate migration routes spanning thousands of miles to locations they've never visited, following paths somehow encoded in their genes across multiple generations. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious attempted to explain why certain symbols, stories, and psychological patterns seem to resonate across cultures and time periods. Jung suggested that humans might inherit archetypal patterns of thought and behavior that create common psychological structures across all cultures. While not scientifically validated in Jung's original formulation, This idea hints at the possibility that some apparently remembered knowledge might actually reflect inherited psychological templates rather than individual memories. Recent research in epigenetics has revealed that environmental experiences can affect gene expression in ways that persist across generations, providing a potential mechanism by which information about ancestral experiences might be biologically transmitted. Studies have shown that trauma, stress, and other environmental factors can leave molecular marks on DNA that affect how genes are expressed, and these epigenetic changes can sometimes be passed to offspring. Research on Holocaust survivors and their descendants has provided some of the most compelling evidence for transgenerational epigenetic effects. Studies have found that children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors sometimes show stress response patterns and psychological characteristics that seem to reflect their ancestors' traumatic experiences, even when these descendants had no direct exposure to trauma. This suggests that some information about environmental experiences can be encoded in biological systems and transmitted across generations.
Animal studies have provided even more dramatic examples of epigenetic inheritance. Research with mice has shown that traumatic experiences in one generation can affect the fear responses of subsequent generations, with offspring displaying heightened fear responses to stimuli that traumatize their parents or grandparents. These effects can persist for multiple generations and appear to be mediated by epigenetic changes in genes involved in stress response and memory formation. Could similar mechanisms explain some apparent past life memories? If traumatic or emotionally significant experiences leave epigenetic marks that affect the psychological development of descendants, might some children inherit not just general stress responses, but more specific behavioral patterns or even fragments of knowledge related to their ancestors' experiences? While current research on epigenetic inheritance doesn't support the transmission of specific memories, it does demonstrate that environmental experiences can leave biological traces that affect subsequent generations. The timing of past life memory reports, typically emerging in early childhood when genetic and epigenetic influences on development are particularly active, might support this interpretation. Young children are in the process of expressing inherited potentials and developing the neural systems that will shape their adult personalities and abilities. If genetic or epigenetic inheritance included information about ancestral experiences, this might be the developmental period when such inheritance would be most likely to manifest. However, significant limitations constrain genetic explanations for past life memories. While genes clearly influence broad capabilities and tendencies, they don't appear capable of encoding the specific detailed information that characterizes many past life memory reports. Inheriting a general musical ability is very different from remembering specific songs or particular musical performances. Genetic inheritance of language learning capacity is distinct from recalling specific conversations or detailed knowledge of historical linguistic practices. The specificity problem becomes even more challenging when considering cases where children provide detailed information about particular historical individuals, specific locations, or precise events. Genetic inheritance might explain why a child has unusual abilities or interests, but it cannot easily account for knowledge of particular names, addresses, family relationships, or historical events that would require access to specific information rather than general capabilities. The geographical distribution of past life memory cases also poses challenges for genetic explanations. While some cases involve children whose claimed past lives occurred within their own cultural or geographical regions where genetic inheritance might be plausible, many cases involve claims about lives in distant locations or different ethnic groups where direct genetic inheritance seems unlikely. Furthermore, genetic inheritance operates through family lineages, requiring biological connections between the child reporting memories and the deceased individual they claim to remember. Investigations of past life memory cases often specifically look for such family connections and generally consider cases stronger when no such connections can be found. This methodology, while important for ruling out conventional explanations, also makes genetic inheritance less likely as an explanation for the strongest documented cases. The temporal patterns in past life memory cases present additional challenges for genetic explanations. Many reported past lives involve individuals who died relatively recently, sometimes just a few years before the child's birth. For genetic inheritance to account for these memories, the relevant genetic material would need to have been transmitted from the deceased person to the child's family line within this short time frame, which would require family connections that researchers typically work to rule out. Epigenetic inheritance, while more flexible than direct genetic inheritance, still operates through family lineages and typically involves general stress responses or behavioral tendencies rather than specific memories.
Current research suggests that epigenetic effects usually diminish over successive generations, making it unlikely that specific information about particular individuals or events could be preserved and transmitted with the precision reported in detailed past life memory cases. Still, the possibility that some apparent past life memories might reflect the expression of inherited biological influences rather than genuine recollections from previous lives remains an interesting avenue for investigation. Such explanations might account for cases where children display unusual abilities, preferences, or general knowledge that seems to exceed their learning opportunities, even if they cannot explain the most specific and detailed aspects of past life memory reports. The interaction between genetic inheritance and environmental factors adds another layer of complexity to this puzzle. Children who inherit particular capabilities or sensitivities might be more likely to notice, absorb, or respond to environmental information in ways that could contribute to the development of detailed narratives about supposed past lives. A child with inherited musical abilities might be more likely to pick up fragments of historical musical knowledge from various sources and weave them into a coherent story about a previous life as a musician. Understanding genetic and epigenetic inheritance doesn't provide a complete explanation for past life memory phenomena, but it does offer a framework for thinking about how some aspects of these experiences might arise through biological mechanisms that don't require consciousness to survive death. Such explanations might account for the general features or background characteristics of past life memory reports while leaving the most specific and verifiable details to be explained through other mechanisms, whether conventional or extraordinary. Human beings are exceptional pattern recognition machines, equipped with cognitive systems that evolved to find meaningful connections in complex environments. We're so adept at detecting patterns that we sometimes see them where none exist, a phenomenon psychologists call apophenia. This tendency to find meaningful coincidences in random events might explain some past life memory cases, raising important questions about how we distinguish between genuine anomalies and the inevitable coincidences that emerge when we examine large numbers of cases. Consider the sheer scale of human history and the vast number of people who have lived and died across time. Conservative estimates suggest that over 100 billion humans have existed throughout history, each living complex lives filled with countless details about locations, relationships, occupations, and personal experiences. With such an enormous pool of historical individuals and life details, the probability of chance coincidences becomes statistically significant when children make statements about supposed past lives. When a child provides specific information that matches the life of a deceased person, we naturally focus on the apparent correspondences while potentially overlooking the broader statistical context. If thousands of children worldwide make statements about past lives each year, and if these statements include multiple specific details, the laws of probability suggest that some impressive matches will occur purely by chance, even without any supernatural explanation. The confirmation bias plays a crucial role in how these coincidences are perceived and remembered. When investigating a potential past life case, researchers, families, and communities naturally focus on statements that can be verified and seem accurate, while details that don't match or can't be confirmed may be overlooked, rationalized away, or simply forgotten. This selective attention can create the impression of remarkable accuracy even when the overall hit rate might not be statistically significant. There's also what statisticians call the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, named after the joke about a gunman who shoots at a barn and then draws targets around the bullet holes to make his aim appear perfect. When investigating past life cases, there's a risk of drawing the target around the arrow after it's been shot. A child might make many statements about a supposed past life, and investigators may then search for deceased individuals who match some subset of these statements, potentially finding correspondences that appear impressive but actually represent the expected outcome of searching through large amounts of historical data. The availability of historical records varies dramatically across different regions and time periods, creating what researchers call escarpment bias. In areas with extensive documentation and strong record-keeping traditions, it may be easier to find matches for children's statements, not because the statements are more accurate, but because more information is available for comparison. Conversely, in regions with limited historical documentation, potentially accurate statements might go unverified, creating the false impression that past life memories are more common in well-documented areas. The process of memory reconstruction during investigation can also contribute to apparent coincidences. Family members who are asked to recall what a child said months or years earlier may unconsciously modify their recollections to better match information discovered during the investigation. This isn't deliberate deception, but rather a natural consequence of how human memory works, with current knowledge influencing the reconstruction of past events. Language and translation issues can create additional opportunities for apparent matches that may not be as precise as they initially appear.
When cases involve multiple languages or cultural contexts, subtle differences in meaning, cultural assumptions, or translation choices can affect how statements are interpreted and verified. Details that seem to match precisely in one language might be more ambiguous or general when examined in their original linguistic context. The social dynamics of investigation can also influence the perception of coincidences. When families, communities, and researchers are emotionally invested in validating a past life connection, there may be unconscious pressure to emphasize correspondences while minimizing discrepancies. This doesn't require deliberate fraud, but can emerge from the natural human tendency to find meaning and significance in experiences that feel emotionally important. However, statistical analysis of past life cases is complicated by the fact that we don't know the base rates of such reports. How many children worldwide make statements about past lives that are never investigated? How many investigations fail to find meaningful matches and are never reported in the research literature? Without understanding the full picture, including negative cases and failed investigations, it's difficult to assess whether documented successes represent genuine anomalies or simply the expected outcomes when large numbers of cases are examined. Some researchers have attempted to address these statistical challenges by developing more rigorous analytical methods. They've tried to quantify the probability of chance matches by examining factors such as the specificity of statements, the size of the population from which matches might be drawn, and the number of independent correspondences found in individual cases. These analyses suggest that the strongest past life memory cases contain multiple specific matches that would be highly unlikely to occur by chance alone. Yet even these statistical approaches face significant limitations. The complexity of human lives and historical information makes it difficult to calculate precise probabilities for specific correspondences. How likely is it that a child would correctly guess the name of a deceased person's spouse? The answer depends on factors such as the popularity of names in different time periods, regional naming patterns, family traditions, and cultural practices that are often difficult to quantify precisely. The interconnectedness of communities, particularly in traditional societies where many past life cases are reported, creates additional complexity for statistical analysis. Information about deceased community members may be more widely known than researchers realize, transmitted through informal networks of family stories, local gossip, and cultural memory that don't leave clear documentary traces. What appears to be remarkable coincidence might actually reflect the child's access to community knowledge through subtle channels that are difficult to detect. Modern technology and global communication have also changed the landscape of potential coincidences. Children today have access to vast amounts of historical information through television, internet, books, and casual conversations that previous generations did not. This expanded information environment increases the probability that children might encounter details about historical periods, foreign locations, or deceased individuals that could later emerge as apparent past life memories. The phenomenon of cryptomnesia, where forgotten information resurfaces as apparently new knowledge, becomes particularly relevant when considering statistical coincidences. A child might encounter historical information through various sources, forget the original context, and later recall the details as personal memories. When these recalled details happen to match the life of a specific historical individual, the correspondence might appear to be a remarkable coincidence when it actually reflects forgotten learning. The role of suggestion and leading questions during investigation can also create apparent coincidences that don't reflect genuine matches. If investigators unconsciously guide conversations toward specific topics or provide subtle cues about the types of information they're seeking, children might modify their statements in ways that increase apparent correspondences with potential past life candidates. Even accounting for these various factors, some researchers argue that the strongest documented cases contain such specific, multiple correspondences that coincidence alone seems inadequate as a complete explanation. They point to cases where children provide numerous independent details that all match the life of a single deceased individual, where the probability of chance correspondence becomes vanishingly small when calculated using conservative statistical assumptions. The challenge lies in determining where the line falls between remarkable coincidence and genuinely anomalous phenomena. This determination requires not only careful documentation of individual cases, but also systematic analysis of large numbers of reports, including those that fail to produce meaningful matches. It also requires honest acknowledgement of the cognitive biases and methodological limitations that can make coincidences appear more significant than they actually are. Understanding the role of coincidence and pattern recognition in past life memory cases doesn't automatically debunk all such reports, but it does provide important context for evaluating them. It reminds us that human beings are naturally inclined to find meaningful patterns even in random events, and that impressive correspondences can occur by chance when large numbers of cases are examined over time. The statistical perspective also highlights the importance of developing better methodological approaches for distinguishing between genuine anomalies and expected coincidences. This might involve creating larger databases of past life memory reports, developing more sophisticated statistical models for assessing corresponding probabilities, and implementing more rigorous controls for investigator bias and selective reporting. Ultimately, the question of coincidence versus anomaly in past life memory cases reflects broader questions about how we evaluate unusual phenomena and what standards of evidence we should apply to claims that challenge conventional understanding. While statistical analysis can provide valuable tools for this evaluation, it cannot definitively resolve the debate, particularly when dealing with complex phenomena that involve psychological, cultural, and historical factors that are difficult to quantify precisely. To truly understand past life memories, we must grapple with one of the deepest and most perplexing questions in science: what is consciousness, and how does it relate to the physical brain? This question, known as the hard problem of consciousness, goes beyond explaining how the brain processes information to address why there's a subjective, first-person experience at all. The answer to this fundamental puzzle shapes how we interpret reports of past life memories and determines what explanations we consider possible or impossible. Most neuroscientists and philosophers of mind operate under the assumption that consciousness is produced by brain activity, a position known as physicalism or materialism. In this view, subjective experience emerges from the complex interactions of neurons, neurotransmitters, and electrical activity in the brain. Consciousness is seen as a higher-level property that arises from the underlying physical processes, much like wetness emerges from the interaction of water molecules, or how the properties of a symphony emerge from the combination of individual musical notes. If physicalism is correct, then consciousness ends when brain activity ceases, making past life memories fundamentally impossible. There would be no conscious self to survive death and carry memories to a new life, because consciousness itself would cease to exist when the neural networks that generate it shut down permanently. In this framework, reports of past life memories must be explained through conventional mechanisms such as false memory formation, suggestion, coincidence, or psychological phenomena that don't require consciousness to persist beyond biological death. However, consciousness remains one of science's most profound mysteries. Despite decades of neuroscientific research, we still don't fully understand how subjective experience arises from neural activity, or whether our current materialist assumptions about consciousness are complete and accurate. The relationship between objective brain states and subjective mental experiences continues to puzzle researchers and philosophers, leaving room for alternative theories about the nature of consciousness. The philosopher David Chalmers articulated the distinction between the easy problems and the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, while technically challenging, involve explaining cognitive functions such as attention, memory, language processing, and behavioral responses. These problems are considered easy because we can conceive of how they might be solved through detailed understanding of neural mechanisms and information processing systems. The hard problem, by contrast, involves explaining why there's something it's like to have conscious experiences. Why is there a subjective qualitative dimension to mental states? Why do we have inner experiences of redness when we see red objects, or feelings of pain when tissue is damaged, rather than simply processing information and responding behaviorally without any accompanying inner experience? This explanatory gap between objective physical processes and subjective mental experiences has led some researchers to question whether consciousness can be fully understood within a purely materialist framework. Some philosophers and scientists have proposed that consciousness might be a more fundamental feature of reality than previously thought. Rather than consciousness being produced by complex arrangements of matter, they suggest it might be a basic property of the universe, similar to mass, electric charge, or other fundamental physical properties. This position, known as panpsychism or cosmopsychism, doesn't necessarily validate past life memories, but it does open conceptual space for thinking about consciousness in ways that might not be limited by the death of particular brains. The integrated information theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, attempts to quantify consciousness based on how much integrated information a system generates. According to this theory, consciousness corresponds to the amount of information generated by a system above and beyond its individual parts. While IIT is primarily used to understand consciousness within individual brains, some theorists have speculated about whether consciousness might exist at different scales, or in different forms that we don't currently recognize. Quantum theories of consciousness, while highly controversial and lacking strong empirical support, have also been proposed as potential explanations for how consciousness might operate beyond the boundaries of classical physics. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff suggested that consciousness emerges from quantum computations in cellular structures called microtubules, potentially allowing for non-local effects that could theoretically enable information transfer between different brains or even across time.
However, most neuroscientists remain skeptical of quantum theories of consciousness, pointing out that the brain appears to operate primarily through classical physical and chemical processes, and that quantum effects would likely be too fragile to survive in the warm, noisy environment of biological tissue. The brain's apparent ability to maintain coherent function despite constant molecular motion and thermal noise suggests that consciousness relies on robust classical mechanisms rather than delicate quantum phenomena. The binding problem in neuroscience raises additional questions about how consciousness integrates information from different brain regions into unified experiences. When we perceive a red apple, visual information about color, shape, texture, and movement is processed by different brain areas, yet we experience a single coherent object. Understanding how the brain achieves this integration of distributed information processing remains an active area of research and might provide insights relevant to understanding consciousness more broadly. Research on split-brain patients, individuals who have had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed to treat severe epilepsy, has revealed surprising aspects of consciousness and personal identity. These patients sometimes display behaviors suggesting that different aspects of their personality and consciousness can operate independently in different brain hemispheres, raising questions about whether consciousness is truly unified or whether it might be more fragmented and distributed than we typically assume. The study of altered states of consciousness, including those induced by meditation, psychedelic substances, or near-death experiences, has provided additional perspectives on the nature of consciousness and its relationship to brain activity. Some individuals report experiences during these states that feel more real and significant than ordinary waking consciousness, including apparent memories of previous lives or access to information that seems to transcend individual brain boundaries. While altered states of consciousness are clearly associated with changes in brain activity, the relationship between these neural changes and the reported subjective experiences remains complex and not fully understood. Some researchers argue that these states might reveal normally hidden capacities of consciousness, while others maintain that they represent altered forms of normal brain processing that don't necessarily provide access to genuine non-local information. The placebo effect demonstrates the profound influence that consciousness and belief can have on physical processes in the body. The expectation of healing can produce measurable physiological changes, suggesting that the relationship between mind and body is more complex than simple one-way causation from brain to experience. While this doesn't prove that consciousness can exist independently of the brain, it does suggest that conscious processes can influence physical reality in ways that we don't fully understand. Near-death experiences, reported by some individuals who have been close to death or clinically dead, sometimes include elements that seem relevant to questions about consciousness and survival. Some people report out-of-body experiences, encounters with deceased relatives, or access to information that they claim they couldn't have known through normal sensory channels. While these experiences might be explained through brain activity during extreme physiological stress, they raise questions about whether consciousness might persist or operate differently during states that approach death. The neuroscientist Eben Alexander, who reported a detailed near-death experience during a coma caused by bacterial meningitis, argued that his experience occurred when his brain cortex was non-functional, leading him to conclude that consciousness might not be entirely dependent on brain activity. However, other neuroscientists have pointed out that determining exactly when specific experiences occurred relative to brain activity is extremely difficult, and that some neural activity might have persisted even during apparent cortical shutdown. The relationship between consciousness and memory adds another layer of complexity to understanding past life memory phenomena. If consciousness has properties that we don't currently understand, it's possible that these properties might also affect how memories are formed, stored, and accessed in ways that could account for unusual memory phenomena without requiring memories to transfer between different brains. Recent research on memory reconsolidation has shown that memories are more flexible and reconstructive than previously thought. Each time we recall a memory, it becomes temporarily labial and can be modified before being reconsolidated. This process might create opportunities for unusual memory phenomena to emerge through mechanisms that don't require consciousness to survive death, but that go beyond simple false memory formation. The question of whether consciousness extends beyond individual brains remains highly speculative, but it's worth noting that our understanding of consciousness continues to evolve as neuroscience advances. What seems impossible within current paradigms might become conceivable as our theoretical frameworks develop and as new empirical findings challenge existing assumptions. The implications of consciousness research for understanding past life memories remain uncertain, but the ongoing mysteries surrounding consciousness suggest that definitive conclusions about what is possible or impossible regarding unusual memory phenomena may be premature.
While materialist explanations for consciousness remain dominant in neuroscience, the hard problem of consciousness continues to resist easy solutions, leaving conceptual space for alternative theories that might accommodate phenomena that current paradigms cannot easily explain. Understanding consciousness and its relationship to the brain is crucial for evaluating past life memory claims, but the current state of consciousness research suggests that this understanding remains incomplete. Whether future developments in consciousness science will support or undermine the possibility of past life memories remains an open question, highlighting the importance of maintaining both scientific rigor and intellectual humility when confronting phenomena that challenge our current understanding of mind and reality. Some of the most intriguing aspects of past life memory cases involve not just verbal statements but physical correlations that seem to connect children's bodies with the lives they claim to remember. These include birthmarks that correspond to wounds described in past life memories, unusual phobias that seem to relate to the manner of the previous personality's death, and skills that appear without obvious learning opportunities. These physical manifestations add a layer of complexity to the phenomenon that challenges conventional explanations in ways that purely verbal statements might not. Dr. Ian Stevenson documented many cases where children not only provided verifiable information about past lives but also bore birthmarks or birth defects that seemed to correspond to injuries described in their accounts. In some instances, these marks allegedly matched medical records or autopsy reports of the deceased person the child claimed to have been. The correspondence wasn't just general but often included specific details about location, size, and shape that seemed to go beyond what would be expected from random chance. For example, a child might be born with a distinctive linear birthmark on their chest and later describe being stabbed in that exact location during a previous life. Another might have a birthmark on their head that corresponds to a gunshot wound documented in the medical records of the person they claim to have been. In some cases, children bore multiple birthmarks that seem to match entry and exit wounds described in their past life memories, with the marks appearing on opposite sides of the body in ways that would be consistent with the trajectory of a bullet or other projectile. The specificity of these correspondences was often remarkable. Stevenson photographed and measured birthmarks, comparing them to available medical documentation about the previous personality's injuries. In cases where autopsy reports were available, he noted correlations between the documented wounds and the child's birthmarks that seemed to exceed what would be expected from coincidence. Some children had birthmarks in unusual locations that matched rare types of injuries, while others displayed patterns of multiple marks that corresponded to complex trauma scenarios. Birth defects presented an even more dramatic category of physical correlations. Some children were born with malformed or missing fingers that corresponded to injuries described in their past life memories. Others had skeletal abnormalities, facial deformities, or other physical conditions that seemed to relate to trauma or illness in their claimed previous lives. A child born with a severely shortened arm might recall having that arm crushed in an industrial accident, or a child with a cleft palate might describe facial injuries from their supposed past life. Phobias constitute another category of physical and emotional correlations that researchers have found intriguing. Children often display intense fears that seem to relate directly to the manner of their claimed previous personality's death. A child who describes drowning in a past life might develop an extreme phobia of water that goes beyond normal childhood fears. Another who recalls dying in a house fire might display terror of flames, smoke, or even the sound of fire engines that seems disproportionate to any actual exposure to fire-related dangers. These phobias often manifest very early in childhood, sometimes before the children are able to articulate their past life memories verbally. Parents report that their infants or toddlers display extreme reactions to specific stimuli that later correlate with details from the past life stories that emerge as the children develop language. The intensity and specificity of these fears often surprise parents and seem to go beyond typical childhood phobias in their persistence and emotional impact. Some children also demonstrate skills or preferences that appear to correlate with their claimed past lives. A young child might show unusual aptitude for activities they've never been taught, such as swimming, dancing, playing musical instruments, or performing manual tasks that would normally require extensive training.
Others display sophisticated knowledge about occupational practices, cultural customs, or technical procedures that seem beyond their age and experience. The timing of these skill demonstrations can be particularly striking. Children might spontaneously perform complex behaviors without any apparent learning opportunity, often in contexts that relate directly to their past life claims. A child who claims to have been a baker might demonstrate detailed knowledge of bread-making techniques, or one who describes being a mechanic might show unusual understanding of how engines work, despite having no exposure to these activities in their current life. However, alternative explanations exist for these physical and behavioral correlations. Birthmarks are extremely common in newborns, occurring in predictable patterns and locations. The human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random events might lead families to connect existing marks to past life stories after the fact, especially when the stories develop gradually over time. The process of investigating past life claims might unconsciously influence how birthmarks are interpreted and described. Birth defects, while less common than birthmarks, occur at measurable rates in the general population due to genetic factors, environmental influences during pregnancy, and random developmental variations. The presence of a birth defect in a child who later reports past life memories might represent a coincidence that becomes meaningful only in retrospect, particularly if the family or investigators are motivated to find connections between the child's physical condition and their claimed memories. Phobias can develop from various sources that don't require past life explanations. Prenatal influences, birth trauma, early environmental exposures, or genetic predispositions might contribute to fear responses that seem to emerge spontaneously. Children might also develop fears through indirect exposure to frightening information through television, overheard conversations, or subtle cues from anxious adults, even when this exposure isn't consciously remembered. The development of unusual skills in children often reflects the complex interaction of genetic predispositions, environmental opportunities, and individual interests that might not be immediately apparent to observers. A child who demonstrates musical ability might have inherited genetic advantages for music and been exposed to musical stimuli in ways that aren't obvious to parents. Similarly, children often absorb information from their environment in subtle ways that can later emerge as apparently spontaneous knowledge. The interpretation of these correlations is also influenced by cultural context and investigative procedures. In societies where past life beliefs are common, families might be more likely to notice and remember physical features or behaviors that seem to support reincarnation claims. The process of documenting and investigating these cases might also influence how physical features are described and interpreted, with investigators unconsciously seeking connections that support their hypotheses. Statistical considerations become important when evaluating these correlations. With millions of children born each year, many with birthmarks or minor birth defects, and with detailed information available about countless deceased individuals throughout history, some impressive correspondences between physical features and historical injuries would be expected to occur by chance. The challenge lies in determining whether documented correlations exceed what would be predicted by random matching. The quality of medical documentation for historical injuries also varies significantly. Autopsy reports and medical records from earlier time periods often lack the detail and precision that would be needed to make definitive comparisons with birthmarks or birth defects. Cultural practices regarding documentation of deaths and injuries differ across societies and time periods, making verification of claimed correlations difficult in many cases. Yet proponents of reincarnation research argue that the combination of specific verbal statements, verifiable historical details, and corresponding physical markers creates a pattern that's difficult to explain through coincidence alone, especially when documented in multiple cases across different cultures. They contend that while individual elements might have conventional explanations, the clustering of multiple types of evidence in single cases suggests phenomena that deserve serious scientific consideration. The challenge for researchers lies in developing objective criteria for evaluating these correlations and distinguishing between genuine anomalies and expected coincidences. This requires not only careful documentation of individual cases, but also systematic analysis of large numbers of reports to determine base rates for various types of correlations and to identify patterns that might indicate genuine phenomena versus statistical artifacts. The physical aspects of past life memory cases continue to generate both fascination and skepticism, representing perhaps the most challenging elements of these phenomena to explain through conventional mechanisms, while simultaneously being among the most difficult to verify objectively. Whether these correlations represent genuine evidence for survival of consciousness and memory beyond death, remarkable coincidences, or phenomena that science doesn't yet understand, remains an open question that continues to puzzle researchers and challenge our understanding of the relationship between mind, body, and the persistence of personal identity across time. Investigating past life memory claims presents unique methodological challenges that make definitive conclusions difficult to reach and highlight the complexities of applying scientific methods to spontaneous phenomena that cannot be replicated in controlled laboratory settings. Unlike conventional scientific experiments that can be designed, controlled, and repeated, these cases involve unrepeatable historical events and depend heavily on witness testimony, documentary evidence, and subjective interpretations that resist straightforward validation. One of the most significant challenges is the problem of retrospective investigation. Most cases come to researchers' attention only after families have begun to suspect a connection between a child's statements and a deceased person, often weeks or months after the original statements were made. By this time, the child's original words may have been influenced by subsequent information discovered during family discussions, preliminary investigations, or community conversations about the possible past life connection. This temporal gap between original statements and formal documentation creates opportunities for memory contamination that are difficult to detect or control. Family members who are asked to recall what a child said during earlier conversations may unconsciously modify their recollections based on information they've learned since then. The child themselves may incorporate new information into their narrative, gradually altering their account in ways that increase apparent correspondences with the identified past life candidate. The issue of investigator bias presents another significant methodological challenge. Researchers who spend their career studying reincarnation phenomena may unconsciously favor interpretations that support their hypotheses, while skeptical investigators might dismiss evidence too readily or focus disproportionately on potential flaws in the documentation. The ideal investigation would involve neutral parties with no stake in the outcome, but such complete objectivity is rare in practice, particularly given the specialized knowledge required to conduct these investigations effectively. Documentation presents ongoing challenges throughout the investigative process. Many cases rely heavily on the memories of family members about what a child said months or years earlier, but human memory is notoriously unreliable and subject to systematic distortions over time. Witnesses may remember statements as being more specific or dramatic than they actually were, particularly when those statements later seem to match historical facts. The emotional significance attached to potential past life connections can further influence how statements are remembered and reported. The verification of historical claims often depends on records that may be incomplete, inaccurate, or unavailable. Official documentation in many parts of the world is sparse, particularly for ordinary people living in earlier eras or in regions with limited bureaucratic infrastructure. Death certificates, medical records, and other formal documents that might corroborate specific claims are often missing or contain insufficient detail for meaningful comparison with children's statements. Local knowledge and community memory present additional complications for verification. Information about deceased community members may be preserved through informal networks of family stories, local gossip, and cultural memory that don't leave clear documentary traces but could potentially be accessed by children through subtle social channels. Distinguishing between remarkable knowledge that requires supernatural explanation and information that might be available through normal but obscure social transmission becomes extremely difficult. Cultural and language barriers can complicate investigation when cases occur across different countries, ethnic groups, or linguistic communities. Researchers may need to work through translators when investigating cases in different countries, introducing potential distortions in communication and understanding. Cultural assumptions about appropriate investigative procedures, the significance of particular types of evidence, and the interpretation of children's statements can vary dramatically across different societies. The challenge of establishing causation versus correlation affects many aspects of these investigations. Even when strong correspondences are found between children's statements and historical facts, determining whether these correspondences result from genuine past life memories, conventional information acquisition, or chance requires careful analysis that's often complicated by incomplete information about how the child might have encountered relevant knowledge through normal channels. Temporal considerations add another layer of complexity to methodological challenges. The timing of when specific statements were made relative to when particular information became available to the child's family is crucial for ruling out conventional explanations, but establishing precise timelines often proves difficult. Information transmission can occur through subtle channels that leave few traces, making it challenging to determine definitively when and how children might have acquired specific knowledge.
The selection and reporting of cases introduces potential biases that affect the overall picture of past life memory phenomena. Cases that produce impressive correspondences are more likely to be investigated thoroughly and reported in research literature, while those that fail to yield meaningful matches may be abandoned and forgotten. This publication bias could create the false impression that past life memories are more accurate or common than they actually are.
Despite these challenges, some researchers have attempted to develop more rigorous protocols that address methodological limitations. These approaches include video recording of children's statements before any investigation begins, using multiple independent investigators to reduce individual bias, and developing statistical methods to assess the probability of chance correspondences more accurately. Some studies have also attempted to investigate cases prospectively, documenting children's statements as they occur rather than reconstructing them retrospectively. The development of standardized interview techniques represents another methodological advancement. Structured approaches to questioning children and families can help reduce leading questions and suggestion while ensuring that important information is systematically collected. However, standardization must be balanced against the need to adapt investigative approaches to different cultural contexts and individual circumstances. Collaboration between researchers with different backgrounds and perspectives has emerged as an important methodological consideration. Teams that include both proponents and skeptics of reincarnation, along with experts in psychology, anthropology, and statistics, can provide multiple viewpoints on the same cases and help identify potential biases or alternative explanations that individual investigators might miss. The question of sample size and statistical power affects the broader interpretation of past life memory research. Individual cases, no matter how well documented, cannot definitively establish or refute the possibility of reincarnation. Systematic analysis of large numbers of cases is needed to identify patterns and assess the overall strength of the evidence, but collecting and analyzing such datasets presents enormous practical challenges. Quality control remains an ongoing concern in reincarnation research. The field lacks standardized criteria for what constitutes adequate evidence or rigorous investigation, making it difficult to compare studies or assess the reliability of findings across different researchers and institutions. The absence of peer review mechanisms specifically designed for this type of research further complicates quality assessment. The replication problem is particularly acute in past life memory research. Unlike laboratory experiments that can be repeated with different subjects under controlled conditions, these cases involve unique historical events that cannot be recreated or replicated. This makes it difficult to verify findings through independent research and limits the application of traditional scientific validation methods. Technology offers some potential solutions to methodological challenges, though it also creates new complications. Digital recording devices can provide more accurate documentation of children's statements, but the ubiquity of information sources through internet and media makes it increasingly difficult to rule out conventional explanations for children's knowledge of historical facts or foreign locations. The establishment of databases and systematic case collection efforts represents an important methodological development. Large-scale data collection could enable statistical analyses that individual case studies cannot provide, but such efforts require significant resources and coordination across multiple research institutions and cultural contexts. Training and standardization of investigators could help address issues of bias and methodological inconsistency. However, the specialized knowledge required for this type of research, combined with the need for cultural sensitivity and language skills, makes it challenging to develop large teams of qualified investigators. The methodological challenges facing past life memory research highlight broader questions about how science should approach phenomena that don't fit neatly into traditional experimental paradigms. These investigations require approaches that can maintain scientific rigor while adapting to the unique constraints of studying spontaneous, unrepeatable events that occur in complex social and cultural contexts. Ultimately, the methodological limitations of past life memory research don't automatically invalidate the phenomena being studied, but they do emphasize the importance of interpreting findings with appropriate caution and acknowledging the significant uncertainties that remain. The development of more sophisticated methodological approaches may help address some of these challenges, but it's likely that definitive conclusions about past life memories will remain elusive given the inherent limitations of studying such complex and elusive phenomena. If past life memories were genuine recollections of previous existences, the question arises of how memories might be transferred from one brain to another across the boundary of death.
This theoretical challenge pushes us into speculative territory that lies at the intersection of neuroscience, physics, and philosophy, forcing us to consider mechanisms that would operate far outside our current understanding of how memory works and how information can be preserved and transmitted between biological systems. One possibility that researchers have considered involves the emerging field of connectomics, the comprehensive study of neural connections in the brain. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons connected by trillions of synapses, creating a network of staggering complexity that encodes our memories, personalities, and cognitive abilities. Some have speculated that if memories could somehow be encoded in a form that transcends individual neural networks, they might theoretically be accessible to other brains with similar organizational structures. This idea faces immediate challenges when we consider the specificity of memory encoding. Memories aren't stored as discrete files that could be copied from one brain to another, but rather as distributed patterns of synaptic connections that involve multiple brain regions working in coordination. A memory of riding a bicycle involves not just abstract knowledge about bicycles, but the integration of visual, motor, emotional, and spatial information processed by different neural networks. For such a memory to transfer intact would require not just preserving information, but recreating the specific neural architecture that encoded the original experience. The discovery of mirror neurons has led some researchers to speculate about whether more extensive forms of neural resonance might be possible. Mirror neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action, suggesting that our brains are naturally equipped to simulate and internalize the experiences of others. Could there be unknown mechanisms that allow this mirroring to extend beyond direct observation, to include historical experiences or information from deceased individuals? While mirror neuron research has revealed fascinating aspects of how we understand and empathize with others, extending these findings to explain past life memory transfer would require mechanisms that operate across time and between unconnected brains. Current research on mirror neurons shows they respond to directly observed actions in real time, not to historical events or experiences that occurred before the observer was born. The neurological basis for such extended mirroring remains purely speculative. Quantum theories of consciousness, while highly controversial and lacking empirical support, have been proposed as potential explanations for how memory transfer might theoretically occur. Some researchers have suggested that if consciousness involves quantum effects, these might operate non-locally in ways that could allow information to be shared between different brains or even across time. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's orchestrated objective reduction theory proposes that consciousness emerges from quantum computations in cellular microtubules, potentially creating possibilities for information transfer that classical physics would prohibit. However, quantum effects in biological systems face significant obstacles in the warm, noisy environment of living tissue. Quantum coherence typically requires extremely isolated conditions that are difficult to maintain in biological systems, where thermal motion and molecular interactions constantly disrupt delicate quantum states. Most neuroscientists remain skeptical that quantum effects play significant roles in normal brain function, let alone in phenomena like memory transfer between different individuals. The field of epigenetics has revealed that environmental influences can affect gene expression in ways that persist across generations, demonstrating that some types of information about experiences can be biologically transmitted. Research on transgenerational trauma has shown that severe stress can leave molecular marks on DNA that affect how genes are expressed in offspring and even grandchildren. Could similar mechanisms potentially preserve and transmit more specific information about individual experiences? Current epigenetic research suggests that while general stress responses and broad behavioral tendencies can be inherited, the transmission of specific, detailed memories would require mechanisms far more precise and complex than anything documented in epigenetic studies. Epigenetic inheritance typically involves changes in gene expression patterns, rather than the encoding of specific experiential information, making it unlikely that detailed memories about particular events, relationships, or personal experiences could be preserved and transmitted through these mechanisms. Some researchers have explored whether electromagnetic fields generated by brain activity might somehow carry information that could be detected by other brains. The brain does generate measurable electromagnetic activity, and some studies have suggested that people might unconsciously respond to the electromagnetic fields of others. Could these fields potentially preserve or transmit memory information in ways that aren't currently understood? Current research on bioelectromagnetism shows that while the brain does generate electromagnetic fields, these are relatively weak and limited in range. The fields produced by neural activity dissipate rapidly with distance and don't appear to carry the kind of complex specific information that would be required to transmit detailed memories. Additionally, these fields cease when brain activity stops, making it difficult to explain how they could preserve information beyond the death of the individual.
Morphic resonance, proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, suggests that patterns in nature might be influenced by similar patterns that occurred in the past through non-local field effects. According to this hypothesis, the formation of memories might create morphic fields that could influence the formation of similar memories in other brains, potentially explaining how past life memories might arise. This theory proposes that nature has an inherent memory that allows past events to influence present experiences through resonance across time and space. However, morphic resonance remains outside mainstream science and lacks empirical validation. The proposed mechanism doesn't specify how complex, specific memories could be preserved and transmitted with the precision reported in detailed past life memory cases. Critics argue that morphic resonance fails to provide testable predictions and doesn't adequately explain why memory transfer would be limited to particular individuals rather than affecting everyone equally. The concept of information storage in quantum vacuum fluctuations represents another speculative possibility that some researchers have considered. Quantum field theory describes the vacuum as a dynamic medium filled with virtual particles and energy fluctuations. Some have speculated that information might somehow be encoded in these vacuum fluctuations and later accessed by sensitive biological systems. This idea suggests that memories might be preserved in the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. This speculation faces enormous theoretical and practical obstacles. There's no known mechanism by which biological systems could encode specific information in quantum vacuum fluctuations, nor any way they could later retrieve such information with the precision required for detailed memory recall. The energy scales involved in quantum vacuum physics are vastly different from those involved in biological processes, making interaction between these levels of reality highly implausible. Research on savant syndrome and exceptional memory abilities has revealed that the human brain is capable of memory feats that seem almost supernatural in their scope and precision. Some individuals can recall vast amounts of information with perfect accuracy, sometimes demonstrating knowledge that seems to exceed their apparent learning opportunities. While these abilities clearly operate through conventional neural mechanisms, they suggest that human memory capabilities might be more extraordinary than typically assumed. However, even the most remarkable cases of exceptional memory involve information that was acquired through normal sensory channels and encoded in conventional ways. These cases don't provide models for how specific memories could transfer between different brains or persist beyond the death of the individual who originally formed them. The phenomenon of cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories resurface and are experienced as new knowledge, demonstrates the complex ways that information can move between conscious and unconscious awareness. Information that was once consciously known can become unconscious and later re-emerge in forms that feel like discoveries or insights rather than recalled memories. This process shows that memory operates in ways that often remain hidden from conscious awareness. While cryptomnesia reveals the complexity of memory processes within individual brains, it doesn't provide a model for memory transfer between different individuals. The mechanisms involved in cryptomnesia depend on information that was originally encoded in the same brain where it later resurfaces, not on information transfer from external sources. The challenge for any theory of past life memory transfer lies not just in explaining how information might move between brains, but in accounting for the specificity and coherence of reported memories. Random information transfer might conceivably produce fragments of knowledge, but the detailed, emotionally coherent narratives reported in past life memory cases would require mechanisms that could preserve complex patterns of experience, emotion, and personal identity across the boundary of death. Current neuroscience provides no viable mechanisms for such memory transfer, and speculative proposals based on quantum effects, electromagnetic fields, or morphic resonance lack empirical support and face significant theoretical obstacles. While our understanding of memory and consciousness continues to evolve, the transfer of specific, detailed memories between different brains remains far outside the boundaries of established science. This doesn't definitively prove that past life memories are impossible, but it does emphasize the extraordinary nature of what such phenomena would require. Any genuine memory transfer mechanism would necessitate revisions to fundamental understanding of how memory works, how consciousness relates to physical processes, and how information can be preserved and transmitted across biological death. Regardless of their ultimate explanation, past life memory experiences can have significant psychological impacts on both children and families, creating complex emotional dynamics that require careful understanding and sensitive responses. These effects are important to consider, not only for providing appropriate support and guidance, but also for understanding how the social and psychological dimensions of these experiences might influence their development and interpretation over time. For children who report past life memories, the experience can be profoundly confusing and sometimes deeply distressing. Young children typically assume that their experiences are normal and universal, so discovering that others don't share their apparent memories of previous lives can be isolating and bewildering. They may feel torn between their current identity and their vivid recollections of being someone else, struggling to integrate these seemingly contradictory aspects of their experience into a coherent sense of self. Some children become intensely focused on their claimed past life, expressing strong desires to return to their previous family, home, or community. They might reject their current circumstances, insisting that their real family lives elsewhere and that their current situation is temporary or mistaken. This rejection can be heartbreaking for parents who find themselves competing with the memory of people and places that may no longer exist or that their child has never actually encountered. The emotional intensity that often accompanies these memories can be particularly challenging for young children to process. A 4-year-old might display grief for a deceased spouse or children from their claimed past life that seems far too mature and complex for their developmental stage. They might experience separation anxiety, depression, or anger that appears disproportionate to their current circumstances, but makes sense within the context of their reported memories. Children sometimes develop specific fears or phobias that seem to relate to their past life memories, particularly concerning the manner of death they claim to remember. A child who recalls drowning might develop an extreme terror of water that interferes with normal activities like bathing or swimming. Another who remembers dying in a fire might panic at the sight of candles or the sound of smoke alarms. These fears can persist for years and may require professional intervention to manage effectively. The social implications of reporting past life memories can also affect children's psychological well-being. In cultures where such reports are uncommon or discouraged, children might learn to suppress or hide their experiences to avoid negative reactions from peers, teachers, or community members. This suppression can lead to feelings of isolation, secrecy, and internal conflict as children struggle to reconcile their private experiences with social expectations. Parents face their own complex psychological challenges when confronted with their children's past life memory reports. The initial reaction is often disbelief, followed by concern about their child's mental health or development. Parents may worry that encouraging these reports could be harmful, while completely dismissing them might damage their relationship with their child or invalidate experiences that feel very real to the young person. In cultures where reincarnation is accepted, families may seek to verify their children's claims and potentially make contact with the previous personality's relatives. This process can create additional stress as families navigate relationships with people who might view the child as a reincarnated family member while struggling to maintain their own bonds with their child. Competition between current and previous families can develop, with each group having different expectations and emotional investments in the child's identity. The investigation process itself can have psychological effects on families and children. When cases attract attention from researchers, media, or local communities, the increased scrutiny and publicity can be overwhelming. Children might feel pressured to provide more details or to perform their memories for observers, potentially affecting the natural development and expression of their experiences. Families may find their privacy invaded and their relationships strained by the attention their child's reports generate. Some parents struggle with questions about their own role and significance in their child's life when faced with claims about previous families and relationships. They might wonder whether their child truly loves them or views them as temporary caregivers until reunion with their real family becomes possible. These concerns can affect parent-child bonding and create ongoing tension within family relationships. The therapeutic implications of past life memory reports have led some mental health professionals to develop specialized approaches for working with affected families. The primary focus is typically on supporting the child's current psychological well-being, rather than determining the truth or falsity of their claimed memories. Therapists may help children process the emotions associated with their experiences while maintaining focus on their present life and relationships. Some therapeutic approaches emphasize helping children integrate their past life memories into their current identity, rather than trying to eliminate or suppress these experiences. This integration process might involve acknowledging the memories as real experiences for the child, while gradually shifting focus toward present relationships and future goals. The goal is to help children develop a coherent sense of self that incorporates their unusual experiences without being dominated by them. Family therapy can be valuable for addressing the complex dynamics that past life memory reports can create within family systems. Parents may need support in learning how to respond to their children's claims in ways that are neither dismissive nor overly encouraging. Siblings might feel neglected or confused by the attention given to past life memories, requiring their own emotional support and understanding. Past life regression therapy, where individuals are guided through hypnosis or guided imagery to recall supposed previous existences, has gained popularity in some therapeutic circles. However, mental health professionals generally approach this practice with considerable caution. The techniques used in regression therapy can easily create false memories that feel completely genuine to clients, potentially causing more harm than benefit. The creation of false memories through suggestion is a well-documented risk in therapeutic settings.
particularly when clients are highly motivated to recover specific types of memories. The techniques used in past life regression, including hypnosis, guided imagery, and leading questions, are precisely the methods that research has shown to be most likely to produce false but convincing memories. Clients may leave therapy sessions with vivid recollections of past lives that were actually created during the therapeutic process. For individuals who spontaneously report past life memories as adults, the therapeutic focus typically involves helping them understand and cope with these experiences, rather than validating or investigating their historical accuracy. The meaning and significance that people attach to their unusual memories often matters more for their psychological well-being than the objective truth of the experiences themselves. The therapeutic implications extend beyond individual cases to broader questions about identity, continuity of self, and the meaning of death. These experiences raise fundamental questions that many people find either comforting or disturbing, depending on their existing beliefs and psychological makeup. Some individuals find past life memories reassuring because they suggest that consciousness and personal identity might survive death, while others find them threatening to their sense of self or religious beliefs. Support groups and online communities have developed around past life memory experiences, providing forums where individuals and families can share their stories and receive emotional support from others who have had similar experiences. These communities can provide valuable validation and practical advice, though they may also reinforce beliefs and interpretations that aren't necessarily accurate or helpful. The role of cultural context in shaping psychological responses to past life memories cannot be underestimated. In societies where reincarnation beliefs are common, families may have established frameworks for understanding and responding to these experiences. Traditional practices might exist for helping children transition between lives or for managing relationships with previous families. In cultures where such beliefs are uncommon, families often feel isolated and uncertain about how to respond appropriately. Educational professionals also play important roles in supporting children who report past life memories. Teachers and school counselors may need guidance in understanding these experiences and responding in ways that support the child's academic and social development. The goal is typically to help children function successfully in their current environment while respecting their experiences and maintaining positive relationships with their families. For families dealing with children who report past life memories, mental health professionals generally recommend responding with neither complete dismissal nor excessive encouragement, but rather with patient listening and support, while maintaining focus on the child's current life and development. The emphasis should be on helping children develop healthy relationships and successful functioning in their present circumstances, regardless of the ultimate explanation for their unusual memories. Understanding the psychological dimensions of past life memory experiences is crucial for providing appropriate support to affected individuals and families. Whether these experiences represent genuine recollections of previous lives, complex psychological phenomena, or something else entirely, their impact on those who experience them is real and significant, requiring compassionate and informed responses from mental health professionals, families, and communities. And so we reach the end of our gentle exploration into one of humanity's most enduring mysteries, the puzzle of past life memories, and what science can tell us about them. We've wandered through documented cases and methodological challenges, examined the nature of memory and consciousness, and confronted the fundamental questions about what it means to be human, and whether our awareness might somehow persist beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. What have we discovered along this quiet journey through the landscape of memory and mystery? Perhaps that the truth, like memory itself, is more complex and elusive than we might wish. The cases of children who report detailed memories of previous lives remain genuinely puzzling, regardless of how we choose to interpret them. They represent a consistent pattern of human experience that occurs across cultures, time periods, and belief systems, demanding our attention even as they resist easy explanation. Science offers us valuable tools for investigation, careful documentation, rigorous analysis, statistical evaluation, and systematic comparison of cases across different contexts. These methods have revealed both the strengths and limitations of past life memory reports, showing us that while some cases contain remarkably specific correspondences with historical facts, others can be explained through conventional mechanisms involving suggestion, coincidence, and the remarkable capacity of developing minds to weave coherent narratives from fragmentary information. The investigation of these phenomena has also reminded us of the limits of what we can know with certainty. Memory is reconstruction rather than playback. Consciousness remains deeply mysterious despite decades of neuroscientific research, and the line between genuine anomaly and remarkable coincidence can be surprisingly difficult to draw with confidence. Human psychology operates according to patterns that can create compelling experiences, even when those experiences don't reflect objective reality, while our tendency to find meaningful connections in random events can make coincidences appear far more significant than they actually are. Whether these experiences represent genuine glimpses of past existences, the fascinating complexity of memory and identity formation in young children, elaborate psychological phenomena we don't yet understand, or some combination of these factors, they remind us that human consciousness is far stranger and more wonderful than we often assume. The boundary between self and other, between past and present, between memory and imagination, proves to be more fluid and permeable than our everyday experience suggests. The cultural dimensions of these reports reveal how deeply our interpretations of unusual experiences are shaped by the frameworks we inherit from our societies, what counts as evidence, how we respond to children's unusual statements, and what explanations we consider plausible, all depend on cultural contexts that vary dramatically across different communities and historical periods. This variability doesn't invalidate the phenomena themselves, but it does remind us that our understanding of any human experience is inevitably filtered through cultural lenses that may be invisible to us.
The skeptical evaluation that past life memory research has received serves important functions in maintaining scientific rigor and preventing premature acceptance of extraordinary claims. This critical scrutiny has led to improvements in investigative methodology and more careful consideration of alternative explanations, ultimately strengthening the quality of research in this challenging field. Yet skepticism must be balanced with openness to possibilities that existing paradigms cannot easily accommodate, recognizing that scientific progress sometimes requires willingness to consider phenomena that challenge established understanding. The psychological impact of these experiences on children and families reminds us that regardless of their ultimate explanation, past life memories are real and significant for those who experience them. The confusion, distress, and wonder that often accompany these reports require compassionate responses that support children's well-being while respecting the complexity of their experiences. The therapeutic approaches that have developed around these phenomena emphasize the importance of helping individuals integrate unusual experiences into healthy, functional lives rather than becoming obsessed with determining their objective truth or falsity. The methodological challenges facing this research highlight broader questions about how science should approach phenomena that don't fit neatly into traditional experimental paradigms. Past life memory cases involve unrepeatable historical events, subjective experiences that resist quantification, and cultural factors that complicate objective analysis. These limitations don't automatically invalidate the research, but they do emphasize the importance of interpreting findings with appropriate caution and acknowledging the significant uncertainties that remain. Current understanding of neuroscience and consciousness provides no clear mechanism by which specific memories could survive the death of the brain that formed them and subsequently appear in a different brain. The physical basis of memory in neural networks and synaptic connections seems incompatible with the idea of memories existing independently of the biological systems that encode them. Yet our understanding of consciousness itself remains incomplete, leaving conceptual space for possibilities that current paradigms cannot easily explain. The future of research in this area will likely depend on continued development of more sophisticated methodological approaches, advances in related fields such as consciousness studies and developmental psychology, and perhaps most importantly, the emergence of theoretical frameworks that can bridge the gap between anomalous phenomena and established science. Whether these developments will ultimately support or refute claims about genuine past life memories remains to be seen. And now, as your own consciousness prepares for its nightly journey into sleep and dreams, let me ask once more, where are you listening from tonight, and what mysteries of your own mind might unfold in the hours ahead? For in sleep, we all travel to places that exist only in the landscape of consciousness, experiencing vivid realities that feel completely genuine while we dream them, creating narratives that can seem as real as any waking memory, even though they spring entirely from the theater of our sleeping minds. Whether consciousness ends with this life or continues beyond it in ways we cannot yet understand, this moment remains genuinely remarkable. Your awareness experiencing these words right now, your mind contemplating questions that have puzzled humanity for millennia, your thoughts weaving together information and imagination in the endless dance of consciousness that makes you who you are. If you found peace in this exploration, if the questions helped quiet your busy mind, or if you simply enjoyed this gentle dive into one of life's enduring mysteries, I'd be grateful if you'd like this video and perhaps subscribe. Share this sleepy space with others who might find comfort in pondering the deeper puzzles of human experience, in exploring the boundaries between science and mystery, between memory and imagination, between what we know and what we wonder about. Sleep well, fellow traveler, and remember that whether our memories span one lifetime or many, whether consciousness is produced by the brain or merely focused through it,
The capacity for wonder, compassion, and curiosity that brought you to this exploration tonight represents something precious and profound about human nature. Rest easy in the mystery, let your dreams carry you wherever they may, and trust that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to explore, to question, and to marvel at the extraordinary complexity of simply being alive and aware in this strange and beautiful universe we call home.